The last tendrils of a bruised orange sunset bled across the quiet suburban street, painting the neatly trimmed lawns in hues of melancholy. Inside his patrol car, parked precisely at the curb, Officer David Miller methodically unwrapped a pre-packaged turkey sandwich. The silence was thick, broken only by the occasional distant hum of traffic and the almost imperceptible crackle of his police radio, a constant, low-level companion. At 32, David carried himself with a quiet efficiency, his movements precise, his gaze often distant, focused on something beyond the immediate landscape. He was a man carved from routine, dedicated to the rigid contours of his profession, a dedication that often felt like a substitute for personal connection. His small apartment, a few miles away, mirrored his car, functional, tidy, and conspicuously devoid of anything overtly personal, save for a worn armchair and a collection of forensic journals. The professionalism he exuded wasn't a mask. It was the very fabric of his being, a self-imposed discipline that kept any deeper currents of loneliness or unfulfilled longings tightly contained. He took a bite of his bland sandwich, chewing slowly, his eyes scanning the street. A lone tabby cat slinked across a driveway, its shadow stretching long and thin behind it. David had chosen this career path with a clear purpose to serve, to protect, to bring order to chaos. But the day-to-day reality was often less about thrilling heroism and more about mediating domestic disputes, directing traffic, and, as tonight, monitoring speed limits on sleepy residential roads. A quiet resignation settled over him, a familiar weight he carried with the same stoicism he applied to every task. He'd seen enough of the world to know that grand gestures were rare, and most heroism manifested in small, unsung acts. Suddenly, a flash of movement at the edge of his vision pulled him from his thoughts. A small, scruffy dog, clearly a stray, hobbled uncertainly near the busy intersection at the end of the street. Its leg was clearly injured, a slight tremor running through its body. David's dinner was forgotten. He checked his watch, nearly off duty. But the sight of the limping creature sparked something within him. Without a second thought, he eased his patrol car forward, pulling over to the side of the road. He stepped out, careful not to alarm the dog, and knelt down, extending a gloved hand. "Hey there, little guy," he murmured, his voice softer than usual. The dog whined, backing away initially. Then, sensing no threat, tentatively approached. David moved slowly, gently coaxing the animal, until he could carefully scoop it up. He checked its leg, noting a shallow cut that thankfully didn't seem to be a fracture. He placed the dog gently on the passenger seat of his patrol car, its whimpers slowly fading as he drove to the nearest animal shelter. The attendants recognized him, a quiet nod of respect passing between them. David stayed for a few minutes, making sure the dog was comfortable and registered, even offering to cover the initial vet fees. Only when he was assured the animal was safe did he leave, the familiar weight in his chest feeling just a fraction lighter. It was a small act, easily overlooked, but it was his way of upholding a silent, personal code, a glimpse into the compassionate core beneath the professional exterior. Back in his car, the lingering scent of damp dog fur was a subtle, pleasant anomaly. He stretched, reaching for his logbook, and his hand brushed against something tucked deep within the glove compartment. He pulled it out. It was an old comic book. Its cover faded and dog-eared, the spine soft from countless readings. Captain Comet Saves the Day. It declared in bold, archaic lettering. The artwork, a vibrant relic from a bygone era, depicted a masked hero in a sleek, silver suit, soaring through flames, rescuing a group of wide-eyed children from a collapsing building. On the hero's chest, emblazoned clearly, was a stylized V insignia. David traced the V with his thumb, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. A wistful, almost childlike expression softened the usual professional detachment in his eyes. He remembered endless hours spent poring over its pages, lost in a world where good always triumphed, and heroes, with their impossible feats. Always saved the day. It felt like a lifetime ago, a discarded phase from a childhood he rarely revisited. The comic felt incongruous in his sterile, ordered world, a brightly colored anomaly amidst the muted practicality of his life. He felt a fleeting flush of embarrassment, quickly shoving it back into the compartment, as if to bury the nostalgic indulgence. But for a fleeting moment, a spark ignited in the depths of his eyes, a flicker of a long-buried dream, a forgotten aspiration for something more than just routine. The comic book was a tiny, vibrant crack in the disciplined facade he so carefully maintained, a subtle hint that beneath the surface of the dedicated officer, a quiet longing for true heroism still resided. The next morning, the muted hum of David's police cruiser was the only sound breaking the serene calm of Willow Creek Lane, a residential artery known more for its manicured flower beds than its high-speed chases. It was the kind of street where children rode bikes without helmets, and elderly residents walked their poodles at a leisurely pace. David, adhering to the almost sacred rules of the neighborhood, maintained a steady, by-the-book pace, his eyes scanning for anything out of place. He was mentally reviewing the day's patrol log, a mundane but necessary ritual, when the unexpected shattered the quietude. A blur of cherry red. It wasn't just fast, it was audaciously fast for Willow Creek Lane. A vintage Ford Mustang, its chrome gleaming under the morning sun, roared past him. The sheer audacity of the speed, the brazen disregard for the posted limit of 25 mph. He clocked it at a blistering 50. In such a sedate, family-oriented neighborhood, was enough to make David's professional hackles rise. This wasn't just a violation. It felt like a challenge. The Mustang, despite its age, hugged the curves with surprising agility, its engine a low, throaty growl. Without hesitation, David flicked on his lights. The bright strobes cut through the morning air, reflecting off the Mustang's polished surface. The siren, usually a blaring intrusion, was kept to a low, insistent warble, a gentle but firm command to pull over. The Mustang didn't immediately respond, continuing its surprisingly spirited drive for another block before its brake lights finally flared, and it pulled smoothly to the side of the road. David felt a flicker of annoyance. A simple speeding ticket was about to become a lecture on civic responsibility. He approached the driver's side, his demeanor shifting to his practiced, stern professional mode. He had dealt with all types, teenagers showing off, disgruntled commuters, even the occasional lost tourist. He expected a flushed, apologetic face, or perhaps a defiant glare from someone much younger. He stopped a few feet from the driver's window, his hand resting casually on his utility belt. The electric window whirred down, revealing not a reckless youth, but an elderly woman. Her hair, a soft cloud of silver, was pulled back loosely, and her face, though lined with age, held an almost mischievous twinkle in her surprisingly sharp, bright blue eyes. Her jaw was set with a subtle defiance, not aggressive, but unwavering. She didn't cower. Instead, she looked at him with a mix of exasperation and amusement, as if he were the one interrupting something terribly important. "Good morning, officer," she said, her voice a dry alto, utterly devoid of apology. "Lovely day for a drive." Wouldn't you say there was a subtle lilt to her tone, an underlying current of playful irony that immediately disarmed David, despite himself? He blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. This wasn't the reaction he anticipated. He was used to immediate contrition or aggressive argument, not witty banter from a speeder. "Ma'am, do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked, trying to reestablish his professional authority, though a tiny crack had already formed in his composure. She sighed, a theatrical puff of air. "Oh, I suppose I was enjoying the scenery a bit too much. This street does have rather delightful oak trees. Don't you think one tends to lose track?" She paused, a faint, almost impish smile playing on her lips. "Though I must say, for a quiet neighborhood, rush hour is rather intense." isn't it?" Her comment was a direct, witty deflection, turning his authority into a gentle joke. David found himself suppressing a smile. This woman was unique. "Ma'am, I clocked you at 50 in a 25 zone." "That's a significant violation," David stated, his voice firm. But a newfound curiosity now mingled with his professional duty. This wasn't just about the speed anymore. He needed to understand her. "Oh, is that all?" she quipped, her eyes twinkling. "I thought I was doing better than that." Her response was audacious, almost flippant, further challenging his expectations. He cleared his throat, trying to regain his professional footing. "I'm going to need your driver's license and registration, please," he said, extending his hand. She reached into her purse, a worn leather bag that looked as vintage as her car, and produced her documents. As she handed over her driver's license, her fingers brushed against his, and David felt a strange, almost electric jolt. He took the laminated card, his eyes scanning the details. The name, Eleanor Vance. The date of birth, placing her well into her 80s. He glanced at her face, then back at the ID. Something in her eyes, a certain spark, or perhaps the faint, almost imperceptible scar near her left temple, stirred a profound, almost forgotten memory deep within him. A memory that hadn't quite surfaced, but hummed just beneath the threshold of recognition. He couldn't just write a ticket and move on. This encounter now held an undeniable, deeply personal weight. His brow furrowed in a puzzled frown. He looked at her again, his professional facade now visibly cracked, a sense of disquieting familiarity washing over him. He was trying desperately to place her, unknowingly standing at the precipice of a life-altering realization that would redefine his understanding of heroism, both past and present. The ordinary traffic stop had just become anything but. David stood frozen, the laminated ID card a weighty object in his hand. His gaze flickered from the name, Eleanor Vance, to the surprisingly vibrant blue eyes of the woman before him, then back to the faded photograph, the scar near her temple. Barely visible, a thin white line against her soft, aged skin, tugged at a distant, half-formed memory. It wasn't just the name or the eyes. It was an undeniable feeling, a resonance from a past he'd long since relegated to the realm of childhood fantasy. He thought of the crumpled comic book in his glove compartment, the one with Captain Comet soaring through the sky, his chest emblazoned with a bold V. Suddenly, a fragmented image flashed through his mind, his grandmother, her voice hushed with reverence, pointing to a faded newspaper clipping. "That's Eleanor Vance, dear. The Scarlet Sparrow. The local legend, the quiet hero who, decades ago, had seemingly materialized out of thin air to save the innocent, often leaving behind only a stylized V as her calling card. Tales of impossible rescues, of daring feats of agility and strength, whispered in the community, passed down through generations. He'd devoured them as a child, those stories of the Scarlet Sparrow, always believing, always hoping, and now, here she was, in the flesh, caught speeding in a vintage Mustang. His eyes instinctively darted to the rearview mirror of her car. Dangled from it, almost camouflaged by the aging vehicle's interior, was a small, intricately carved wooden charm. A perfect, symmetrical V. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just a coincidence. It couldn't be. This was her, the Scarlet Sparrow. "Ma'am," David began, his voice a little strained, a new layer of awe subtly altering his usual professional tone. That's an interesting charm you have there. What does the V stand for?" He tried to sound casual, but his pulse was thrumming. He was probing, testing, hoping she wouldn't see through his sudden fascination. Eleanor Vance looked at the charm, then back at David, a flicker of something unreadable, amusement wariness, in her eyes. "Oh, that an old keepsake," she said, her voice dismissive. Yet there was a subtle stiffness in her posture. Stands for vigilance. Always be vigilant, officer. She offered a small, knowing smile, a subtle challenge beneath the placid surface. She had definitely caught his shift in demeanor. Just as David was about to ask another question, a new sound cut through the air, the distinct whine of another patrol car approaching. Officer Greg Dawson, a younger, ambitious officer, pulled up behind David's cruiser. Dawson was new to the precinct, fresh out of the academy, and utterly by the book, with an almost zealous adherence to procedure. He was known for his sharp suits, his even sharper wit, and a subtle condescension towards anyone he deemed less efficient or less modern than himself. He had probably spotted David's prolonged stop and, ever eager to make an impression, decided to offer backup. Dawson stepped out of his car, his posture erect, his movements brisk. He eyed Eleanor's vintage Mustang with a slight sneer. Then his gaze lingered on David, whose hand was still holding Eleanor's ID, his expression still one of profound, almost reverent confusion. A smug smirk played on Dawson's lips. He'd heard whispers about Miller being too soft, too empathetic for the job, and this confirmed his suspicions. "Everything all right here?" Officer Miller Dawson asked, his voice dripping with feigned concern, a subtle edge of superiority in his tone. He didn't wait for an answer, instead striding purposefully towards Eleanor's car. "License and registration. Ma'am, if you please." Standard procedure. Of course. He reached out, expecting to take the documents from David. David stiffened, a flash of annoyance replacing his awe. Dawson's intrusion was unwelcome, breaking the delicate thread of recognition he was trying to establish with Eleanor. He instinctively held Eleanor's ID tighter. "It's handled, Officer Dawson. Just a routine speeding ticket." But Dawson ignored him, his eyes fixed on Eleanor. Routine. This old bird was doing 50 in a 25 zone. Miller. I saw her tear down the street. That's not just a ticket. That's reckless endangerment. She's a public menace. He spoke directly to Eleanor, his voice condescending, laced with thinly veiled contempt. "Honestly, ma'am, at your age, perhaps it's time to consider something a little slower. A golf cart. Maybe this beauty probably belongs in a museum, not out on the road with you behind the wheel." He gestured dismissively at the Mustang, then back at Eleanor, implying she was too old, too frail, too irresponsible to drive such a powerful machine. His words were a direct assault on her dignity, and David felt a surge of protectiveness. Eleanor Vance's eyes, which had held a playful twinkle moments before, now hardened. The mischievous glint was replaced by a steely, almost imperceptible resolve. She met Dawson's gaze without flinching, her expression unreadable. She didn't respond to his insults, merely a quiet dignity that seemed to challenge his very presence. Dawson, emboldened by her silence, turned back to David. "Officer Miller, let me handle this. I'll process the impound and the hefty citation. No need to go easy on the elderly. After all, they're often the most dangerous drivers. Safety first." He reached for Eleanor's ID again, more assertively this time. He was making a play, demonstrating his perceived superior judgment and initiative, subtly undermining David in the process. He already envisioned the glowing report he'd write about his decisive action. David, however, was already moving. He placed Eleanor's ID gently back into her outstretched hand, his fingers brushing hers again. "Ma'am, I'll be in touch regarding your citation," he said, his voice low, a silent promise in his eyes that he would handle this differently. Then he turned to Dawson, his face now devoid of its earlier awe, replaced by a cold, professional glare. "Officer Dawson, I appreciate your concern, but this is my stop. I have it under control. You can return to your patrol." His tone left no room for argument. Dawson's face flushed with annoyance. He knew he'd been publicly rebuffed by a peer he considered beneath him. He shot a resentful look at Eleanor, then at David, before returning to his car, his movements stiff and angry. He got back in, slammed the door, and sped off, the sound of his tires squealing momentarily disrupting the peace. The incident was far from over. However, Dawson wouldn't forget this slight. He had just witnessed what he perceived as David's incompetence and Eleanor's defiance, and he would use it to his advantage. The stage was set for a deeper confrontation. The summons arrived 3 days later. An official white envelope with the municipal crest, slipping discreetly through Eleanor Vance's mail slot. It wasn't merely a speeding ticket, it was a formal notice for a hearing regarding the revocation of her driving privileges. The complainant, Officer Greg Dawson. He had moved with a calculated swiftness, determined to prove his assessment of Eleanor's reckless endangerment, and, perhaps, to implicitly underscore Officer Miller's supposed leniency. The arena, as David would soon realize, was the local municipal court, a sterile chamber of polished wood and cold legal procedure, far removed from the intuitive, street-level justice Eleanor Vance had once dispensed. David received his own summons to testify, a familiar obligation that usually left him feeling indifferent. But this time, a knot tightened in his stomach. He knew Dawson's game. The younger officer wasn't just pursuing a traffic violation. He was making a case, building a narrative that painted Eleanor as an irresponsible, aging hazard, unsuitable for the road, and in doing so, he was also subtly indicting David for his perceived lack of rigor during the initial stop. The courtroom on the day of the hearing was sparsely populated, primarily by the judge, a court clerk, and a handful of stern-faced driving instructors. Eleanor sat calmly at the defense table, her silver hair neatly pinned, her posture straight. She wore a simple, elegant dress, a quiet defiance in her composed silence. David watched her, a mix of admiration and frustration churning within him. He wanted to speak for her, to reveal the truth. But how could he explain that the woman accused of reckless driving was once a phantom of justice, a whispered legend? The very idea was absurd, unprofessional, a dereliction of his duty to stick to the facts. Officer Greg Dawson, however, was in his element. He strode to the stand, crisp in his uniform, and delivered his testimony with polished precision, exaggerating the Mustang's speed, the near misses, which David knew were non-existent, and emphasizing the potential danger Eleanor posed to a quiet residential neighborhood. His words were carefully chosen, designed to portray Eleanor not just as a speeder, but as a public menace, a clear and present danger. Her actions, Dawson concluded, his voice grave, demonstrate a profound disregard for public safety and a clear unsuitability to operate a motor vehicle, especially one of such high performance, at her advanced age. When it was David's turn, he recounted the facts accurately, but he tried to inject nuances. He mentioned Eleanor's otherwise pristine driving record, her immediate cooperation after pulling over, and the brief duration of the alleged excessive speed. He subtly tried to paint the incident as an anomaly, a momentary lapse rather than a pattern of dangerous behavior. But Dawson, during cross-examination, skillfully dissected David's testimony, highlighting every deviation from the textbook procedure, every moment of perceived hesitation. Officer Miller, Dawson pressed, his voice sharp. "Were you not concerned by the subject's speed?" "I was concerned by the violation. Yes," David replied evenly. "But the context is important." "Context?" Dawson scoffed, turning to the judge. "The context, Your Honor, is a disregard for the law and the safety of our citizens. It seems some officers might be less diligent in their enforcement of traffic statutes when dealing with certain demographics." It was a thinly veiled jab at David's perceived softness, a public challenge to his professional judgment. Eleanor, throughout this ordeal, remained silent. When the judge finally asked if she wished to speak, she merely shook her head, a faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaping her lips. She knew the truth would sound absurd, an old woman claiming a heroic past, and she knew that revealing her identity would expose her, not just to the judge, but to a world that had long since forgotten, or never even knew. The Scarlet Sparrow. She was alone in her knowledge, her burden of secrecy, a heavy cloak. David, too, felt the crushing weight of his silent understanding. He was isolated in his certainty of her true nature, unable to articulate it without sounding utterly outlandish, without compromising his own professional integrity. The judge, swayed by Dawson's persistent and well-prepared arguments, and lacking any counter-evidence from Eleanor herself, delivered his verdict. "Ms. Vance," he began, his voice regretful but firm, "while your record is indeed commendable, the severity of this particular infraction, combined with Officer Dawson's testimony and your apparent lack of remorse, leaves me with no choice. Your license will not be immediately revoked. However," he paused, looking directly at Eleanor, "you must pass a rigorous, immediate reevaluation of your driving skills within the next 24 hours. This will take place tomorrow morning at the Police Academy's driving course. Should you fail to appear, or fail the reevaluation, your license will be permanently revoked. This court aims for safety above all else." The ultimatum hung in the air, a final, unyielding decree. 24 hours. For an 80-year-old woman, even one as seemingly spry as Eleanor. It was an impossible deadline. It wasn't just about driving. It was about her independence, her last vestiges of a truly free life. David saw the subtle tremor in her hands, the almost imperceptible tightening around her eyes. The clock was ticking, and the pressure was immense. Eleanor Vance, the Scarlet Sparrow, was about to face a test far more challenging than any supervillain she'd ever encountered, a bureaucratic obstacle course designed to strip her of her freedom, forcing her to subtly tap into abilities she had suppressed for decades, or lose everything. The morning of the reevaluation dawned crisp and clear, the kind of day that usually promised a fresh start. But for Eleanor, it brought a palpable sense of dread. The Police Academy's driving course loomed, a vast expanse of asphalt meticulously laid out with cones, barriers, and simulated obstacles designed to push even seasoned drivers to their limits. Officer Dawson was there, of course, standing at the edge of the course, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. He watched Eleanor approach, his arms crossed, clearly anticipating her spectacular failure. Several driving instructors, their faces impassive, stood by, clipboards in hand, ready to objectively record every error. Eleanor walked towards her Mustang, her usual confident stride betraying a faint tremble in her hands. She climbed into the driver's seat, the familiar leather of the steering wheel cool beneath her touch. David stood a little distance away, close enough to offer support, but far enough to maintain a professional distance. He met her gaze across the asphalt, and gave her a tiny, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement, a silent message of belief. Eleanor took a deep, steadying breath, her eyes flicking to the V-charm dangling from her rearview mirror. It was now or never. The initial stages of the course were a blur of cones and tight turns. Eleanor, despite her age, handled the vehicle with surprising dexterity. Yet, there were moments of hesitation, slight misjudgments. A cone clipped here, a turn taken a fraction too wide there. Dawson's smirk widened with each minor error, and he made a show of scribbling furiously on his notepad. The instructors exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable, but the subtle shake of a head here or there told David they were noting her imperfections. Then came the critical emergency maneuver section. This was the true test, a simulated obstacle course designed to assess a driver's precision, reflexes, and quick thinking at higher speeds. A series of pop-up obstacles, sudden lane changes, and simulated braking scenarios. Dawson audibly snickered. "Let's see if the old gal can still hit the brakes," he muttered, loud enough for David to hear. Eleanor shifted the Mustang into gear, her hands gripping the wheel. She pressed the accelerator, and the cherry-red car surged forward. She took a deep breath, and for a split second, it was as if a switch flipped within her. The lines on her face seemed to sharpen, her blue eyes gaining an intense, almost youthful focus. It was the gaze of a predator, or perhaps a guardian. Her movements, which had been subtly hesitant moments before, now became fluid, instinctive. She approached the first set of pop-up obstacles. Dawson scoffed, leaning forward. Eleanor, now focused, executed the maneuvers with a precision and grace that defied her age. Her hands were steady on the wheel, her eyes sharp, anticipating every turn, every simulated hazard. The Mustang danced, a crimson blur of controlled chaos. She performed evasive maneuvers that astonished the instructors, her movements so seamless, so natural, they seemed almost supernatural. She weaved through the labyrinth of cones, the car responding to her every command as if an extension of her own body. Her foot worked the pedals with a dancer's grace, her steering wheel inputs minute but perfectly timed. The V-charm on her mirror glinted in the sunlight, a silent testament to a dormant power now stirring to life. Then came the bated breath moment. She approached a particularly tight, multi-car obstacle, simulating a sudden pileup. It required an immediate, sharp swerve, followed by a precise countersteer and rapid acceleration through a narrow gap. Dawson's smugness returned. "She'll never make it," he whispered, a triumphant sneer on his face. Too slow, too old. Eleanor hesitated for a split second, her eyes darting between the clustered cars, the narrow opening. For a terrifying fraction of a moment, it looked like she would hit a cone, or worse, clip one of the simulated vehicles, failing the test spectacularly. David's heart leaped into his throat. He clenched his fists, a silent plea forming on his lips. Then, with a subtle shift in her grip on the wheel, a barely visible twitch of her foot on the accelerator, she executed a daring, almost impossible sequence of turns. The Mustang shrieked around the obstacle, threading the needle with mere inches to spare on either side. The car shimmied slightly, a momentary loss of traction, but she recovered instantly, smoothly, bringing the vehicle under perfect control as she burst through the final gate, finishing the course with an elegant flourish. The silence that followed was deafening. Dawson's smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of utter disbelief. His mouth hung open, his notepad forgotten. The driving instructors, initially skeptical, now exchanged astonished glances. Their clipboards were momentarily forgotten, their eyes wide with awe. One instructor, a grizzled veteran, let out a low whistle. The judge, who had been observing quietly from a distance, leaned forward, a look of profound surprise and grudging respect replacing his stern neutrality. As Eleanor brought the cherry-red Mustang to a smooth, perfect stop at the designated finish line, a ripple of murmurs spread through the small group of observers. The murmurs quickly turned into a crescendo of amazed applause. Dawson looked humiliated, shrinking in on himself, his face a furious shade of red. The judge approached Eleanor, a look of genuine admiration now etched on his face, replacing his earlier sternness. He offered her a rare, respectful bow. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice imbued with genuine respect. "That was an extraordinary display of driving skill. Your license is not only reinstated, but I believe we have much to learn from you." David watched, a quiet, proud smile spreading across his face. His belief in her, a belief rooted in childhood legends and now validated by a visceral display of mastery, was unwavering. Eleanor Vance, the Scarlet Sparrow, had not just passed a driving test. She had delivered a powerful, public vindication, not just for herself, but for the enduring power of hidden heroism. In the wake of Eleanor Vance's extraordinary display, the immediate fallout for Officer Greg Dawson was swift and satisfyingly proportional. His face, still burning with humiliation from the driving course, was a stark contrast to the quiet triumph radiating from Eleanor. The judge, still visibly impressed, ensured that Dawson's overly aggressive and unprofessional conduct did not go unnoticed. Within the week, Dawson was officially put on probation. his ambitious ascent within the police force abruptly halted. He was transferred to a less desirable administrative role, spending his days filing paperwork rather than patrolling the streets. The career he had so meticulously planned was significantly derailed, a direct consequence of his arrogance and ill-placed judgment. A few days after the reevaluation, Dawson, under the direct order of his precinct captain, was forced to issue a grudging, awkward apology to Eleanor. He mumbled something about misunderstanding the situation and overzealous application of procedure. Eleanor simply nodded, her expression unreadable, allowing him a sliver of dignity in his defeat. It was a small act of mercy that revealed the depth of her character. And in that moment, Dawson, for the first time, truly recognized the magnitude of his error. The experience had humbled him, stripping away his pride and leaving him with a newfound, albeit painful, understanding of the human element in law enforcement. He realized that day that not everything could be categorized by a rulebook. Eleanor, however, was not just handed back her old life. The local historical society, having heard whispers of her extraordinary driving skills, and perhaps through hushed, excited conversations among the driving instructors and even the judge, faint echoes of her true past, approached her with a unique proposition. They were preparing an upcoming exhibit on local unsung heroes, and they offered her a part-time consultancy role, valuing her unique perspective and her ability to bring a certain vivacity to historical narratives. More significantly, they asked her to develop and teach an advanced driving safety course for senior citizens, a chance to share her exceptional expertise in a way that truly benefited the community, without ever having to reveal her secret identity. It was an opportunity not just for purpose, but for connection, a way to discreetly continue her legacy of quiet protection. A week later, David visited Eleanor at her quaint, art-filled home. The familiar scent of old books and brewing tea filled the air. They sat in her cozy living room, sipping Earl Grey from delicate porcelain cups. David, now more relaxed around her, his professional facade softened by genuine admiration, finally broached the subject he had been longing to discuss. "Eleanor," he began, his voice low, almost reverent. I remember the stories. My grandmother used to tell them. The Scarlet Sparrow. Was it really you?" Eleanor's blue eyes, which held so many secrets, softened. A faint, knowing smile played on her lips. She looked at David, truly seeing him, seeing the quiet, compassionate core he held. Old habits die hard. "David," she said, her voice a warm alto, confirming everything without needing to say a word. She then recounted a few carefully censored anecdotes from her past, tales of agility and daring, but always emphasizing the deeper purpose behind her actions. She spoke of the importance of doing what's right, even when it's difficult or unpopular, even when no one else is watching, even when the world forgets your name. She leaned forward, her gaze direct and full of wisdom. "You have a good heart, David," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "The world needs quiet heroes like you too, those who uphold the law with compassion, who see beyond the surface, who don't forget the human element, the kind of heroism that isn't flashy, but holds the fabric of society together." Her words resonated deeply within David, validating his own sense of quiet heroism. The small acts of kindness he performed daily, their bond, forged in a traffic stop and cemented by a shared secret, was now unwavering, a silent pact between two different generations of protectors. Eleanor, the legend returned, and David, the modern-day guardian, both committed to a world where vigilance and compassion were paramount. 1 year later, the scent of blooming jasmine mingled with the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee in Eleanor Vance's kitchen, a vibrant contrast to the quiet solitude that once defined her days. Her life, far from receding into the twilight of old age, had blossomed anew. The Historical Society's exhibit, featuring her understated contributions to local history, had been a resounding success, subtly weaving her heroic past into the town's tapestry without ever fully exposing the Scarlet Sparrow. Her advanced driving safety classes for seniors were immensely popular, drawing large crowds. She taught with a mischievous sparkle in her eye, often weaving in anecdotes that, while carefully sanitized, hinted at impossible feats of agility and precision, inspiring her students to embrace driving with renewed confidence and skill. Eleanor's once quiet home now frequently echoed with the laughter of friends and the lively chatter of her students, a testament to her rediscovered joy and purpose. Occasionally, she could still be seen cruising down Willow Creek Lane in her cherry-red Mustang, but now at a perfectly legal, though still undeniably confident, speed, a vibrant flash against the mundane. David Miller had also flourished, inspired by Eleanor's quiet strength and her emphasis on compassion over rigid enforcement. He had evolved beyond the meticulous, by-the-book officer he once was. He'd taken on a mentorship role for new recruits at the academy, often sharing Eleanor's subtle wisdom about the importance of empathy and observation, teaching them to see the person behind the infraction. He still maintained his professionalism, but it was now tempered with a deeper understanding of human complexities, a quality that earned him both the respect of his peers and the trust of the community. He'd even found a better work-life balance, perhaps even adopting a new rescue dog, a playful terrier mix that now accompanied him on his morning runs, a joyful echo of his save the cat moment. Eleanor, ever the quiet benefactor, had established a small, anonymous scholarship fund for aspiring young drivers from disadvantaged backgrounds. She named it the Scarlet V Fund, a subtle nod to her past. The criteria for the scholarship weren't just about driving skill. They emphasized a demonstrated commitment to community, to quiet acts of kindness, and to the courage to do what is right, even when it's difficult. She also volunteered regularly at the local animal shelter, a tribute to David's compassion. Often, she would take the shelter dogs for joyous rides in her Mustang, their happy barks echoing down the residential streets, a delightful ritual that connected her present joy with David's initial act of kindness. The story culminates on a warm spring afternoon at a bustling community fair in the town square. Eleanor, radiant in a simple, elegant dress, stands beside her polished red Mustang, which is now a local landmark, drawing admiring glances. Children gather around her, wide-eyed and captivated, as she recounts a carefully tailored, safe version of one of her past adventures, her voice lilting with the thrill of daring escapes and clever maneuvers. She never explicitly mentions the Scarlet Sparrow, but the glint in her eyes, the subtle gestures, tell their own story. Suddenly, David, now a more senior officer, passes by in his patrol car, his windows down. He spots Eleanor, surrounded by the admiring crowd, and offers her a subtle, respectful salute. Eleanor catches his eye, a knowing smile spreading across her face. She returns his salute with a discreet nod, her gaze lingering on him for a moment, a silent acknowledgement of their shared understanding, their intertwined paths. As he drives off, the V charm on her rearview mirror catches the afternoon sun, glinting brightly, a beacon of renewed purpose and a quiet, enduring legend. The red Mustang, once a symbol of defiance and a harbinger of a forgotten past, now gleams as a testament to a life lived fully, a second spring that blossomed from the most unexpected of encounters, proving that true heroism, in all its forms, always finds a way to shine. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.